I think it's it. I think we're live.
All right, we're live.
So, welcome. And this is our office hours. What we would like to do is, yeah, interact with the community, share, make sure everybody's kind of going in the right direction. And we have a loose agenda that we're still working on, but it's really just going to kind of start on the roadmap, like what's coming, what's happened, what's been released last week. There was no releases. I'm going to pull up our handy calendar that we saw, and calendar.spring.io. This is what's coming up. We actually have releases today, milestone releases: context propagation, micrometer, reactor add-ons, reactor core, reactor Kotlin extension, reactor Netty, reactor pool, all released today. That's great. So what we should be doing for an effective office hours is we should talk about what are the changes in these versus what's available, what's GA today. What we should be doing is talking about what are these changes, and we'll get better at that. We're working on it, but getting that type of a flow so that, hey, here's what's been released, right? This calendar is full, and it's always going to be full. And I think an effective use of our time would be to like talk about some of those things. We can go pull in the release notes like we did last time. But yeah, I'm not doing that today. What I will do is I will talk about another thing that's been announced. We have Spring One Tour. Our first stop is in Chicago.
We get to go see real people. How is that?
Live in person. We're going to take over the town.
I
We're
know.
going to be at the Chicago Jug the day before. We're going to be working.
Who's speaking there? Who's speaking at the Chicago?
I will be there. I will be there.
Oh,
and our good friend Josh Long will also be there.
All right.
And yeah, this should be a good time. Spring One Tour. It's coming to a city near you. You can go and check out the calendar at springonetour.io.
Cool. Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you were saying about the announcements and the release notes. I think we talked about it last week, but I'm sure we have some new viewers this week, and we'll continue to pick up more. But I think one of the I just released a video on what's new in Spring Boot 2.6, and putting that video together gave me a chance to go through the release notes and really like dive in and put some code against each one of those features. And it was the best way for me to kind of learn each of those features, because just reading a snippet in the release notes, you're like, that sounds like a cool addition, but you don't really know until you know. So I think it's a great way to learn, and I think it's a great way for us to be able to kind of get back to community and help everybody understand what's changed. So,
and the value, right? The value that's coming from the Spring developers, the Spring leadership, and the community. I think part of what we can help do is maybe explain why. Like, why was that change released?
Mm-hmm.
What was the purpose? Who was asking for it? And see if we can kind of connect some of the dots. The other part of that is platform teams and architects that are trying to like paint the path for, hey, here's what's coming. We want to stay secure. We want to stay current. Like being able to share, like, here's what's coming. Here's how you can upgrade. Here's how you can take advantage of these new features. Yeah, we'll see.
And the community at large has now that, a part of this office hours is giving you, the community, kind of a direct line to the Spring team, because when you ask us questions, as I was getting ready for that video, I was able to go off to the Spring team and say, hey, Phil, why did we put that feature in there? Like, what is this actually supposed to do? And he would point me to some unit tests and say, read the unit test, Dan. Here's what it's supposed to do. So, yeah, just a great way to get those questions asked and answered.
So I'm going to do one thing. One of the things that I know that I've heard is we want to do a better job of getting these newer examples. We heard it earlier this morning. We want to have like the current best practices and get some of these demos out. So that's what we're going to try to do here too as well, is like deliver these new demos, the new better way of doing things. Because sometimes the popular thing that you Google is popular because it's been around for 20 years, right? And it's got 20 years of people clicking on it and blogs linking to it. So that's why it's at the top. And what we need to do is make sure that the new, current, better practices are being adopted for our community. So I'm going to start by pointing everybody to the Tanzu Developer Center. And I'm just going to throw that link out here this is a good place to start. And this is what you and I will both be doing to improve, right? What's available out there. So that's where you should go take a look at it. Lots of cool stuff. And we will actively be working on making improvements and landing the demos that we do here on office hours. We're going to land them over there. So we have nice resources.
Yeah, and I keep telling people, I didn't, before I came here to VMware, I didn't realize how much great content was over there and free great content. So definitely worth the look. Check out all the archives of all the past shows and podcasts and free learning resources. Just a whole bunch of great stuff from a whole bunch of really smart people there. So.
Excellent. So that's cool. Our normal agenda. We'll do some roadmap stuff. Hey, here's what's coming. We're still figuring this out as we go. But then we'll roll into a demo. Let's talk about something cool. Dan, you got something to share?
Yeah, I do have something to share today. So let me do a couple things here. And let's share my screen. Share.
After we share some stuff, stick around. We'll do some Q&A. And we want this to be a channel for community, not a replacement for Stack Overflow. Some things are hard to explain and they need a little bit more nuance. But we want to start to, create a channel for our community to talk through things. Even if we don't have the answer, we can talk through it.
Yeah, and I think there's some real value in here versus something like a Stack Overflow. Because, you and I have talked about this. When you go to Stack Overflow, you have a very specific problem. I'm getting this error message. These are all the things I have going on in my application. What is that one thing? What is happening there? And, unless we've seen it before 10 times, then we're probably not going to have that answer right off the cuff. But if you bring a question like, hey, Dan, why is constructor injection the preferred method for dependency injection in Spring Boot? Guess what? I just did a video on that. I explained that. This is a topic that we can talk about. And I could point you to that video, but we can also sit here and have a discussion about that. And I think having those discussions and understanding the why and the what behind the things that we do every day is what we can bring to this. So
excellent.
So here's what I want to show off today. We're just going to build a quick little app. And what I want to do today is talk about, there is a slice test called @JSON_test. And this is really useful and powerful, and I think something that we should all be taking advantage of. And as we go and build this out, I'll kind of explain a little bit more. So here we are on start.spring.io. I'm just going to create a new project. We're using Maven and Java. We're using the latest and greatest 2.6.4. I'm going to dev.danvega, and we will call this, is this app that we're going to build. We'll just call this JSON test, and we'll use Java 17. We'll go ahead and generate this, and then we can download this. Looks like it opened in another window. And then I'm going to go ahead and open this with IntelliJ. Okay, so nothing I couldn't have done here in IntelliJ. If you've watched anything that I've done before, I'm a big fan of IntelliJ. I am running the Ultimate Edition, though. That has the Spring Initializer built into it. If you're using the Community Edition, that's completely fine as well. You can do what I just did. Go to start.spring.io, download that zip file, and then just open it up here and open it up in IntelliJ's Community Edition. I'm just going through, I'm just trying to pay attention to some questions here. Hey guys, can you suggest a roadmap to learn Spring? Like there is Servlet and JSP, Spring Core, Spring JDBC, Spring ORM, Spring MVC, Spring Boot. In which sequence is learning better for beginners? This is a great question. I want to talk more about this and use this as a question to talk about when we're done. So I'm hiding this question for now because I think Deshaun and I can talk on that for a long time. So let me get through this demo, and then that is the first question we'll get to. So I'm going to start with, so one of the things that we do often as developers, at least one of the things that, I've done a lot of, is in a web app, you may have a model of an object, say an employee or a customer. And working on the web, you have to serialize and deserialize these objects. So under the hood, when you choose WebMVC, and actually we didn't choose anything, but that's okay because all we need is this guy. But when you choose WebMVC, you get Jackson out of the box, right? So if you come in here and say dependency and Spring Boot starter WebMVC, and you save that and you refresh this, you get a whole bunch of Jackson dependencies with that. Because if you're going to build a web app, you probably need Tomcat, you probably need Jetty, or probably need Jackson and a whole bunch of other things, right? So you get those kind of out of the box first. But a traditional, at least for me, some of you out there who are much better testers than me may have taken a different approach in the past, may have, done your tests first. I end up creating like a web controller, and I create a post mapping, and I try to like post a bunch of JSON to an endpoint and see if everything lines up. And that's great and all, but there's a better way, and I want to kind of walk through kind of the initial. There's always a progression of things, right? But this is my initial way of like, let's worry about the serialization and deserialization of our objects first before we even worry about the web layer. So one of the ways I'm going to do that here is I'm going to come into test, and I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm going to call this resources. And in resources, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and we'll call this developer.json. So in here, I'm just going to create some basic syntax of what a developer might look like, a developer object, right? So we might have an ID, we might have a first name, and we might have a last name. I'm keeping this very simple for simplicity's sake, but we'll go ahead and progress on this in a second. So what I want to do now is I want to test, again, the serialization and deserialization of a developer object. I don't have that developer object yet, but that's okay. This is the kind of me working backwards, like starting with the data, going to the test, then creating that model object. So here in our test package, I'm going to create a new package because this is going to be around a model. And I'm going to create a Java a class called developer JSON test. And here is where we are going to use this slice test. So at JSON test is a slice test. And what this means is that you are not going to start the entire application context up when you want to go ahead and write this test. And this becomes very important. I mean, you'll notice this in smaller applications for sure. But when your applications get really, really big and there are lots of classes and Spring is managing all these classes for you, speed of tests becomes important, because if developers have to sit around and wait 20 seconds for a test to run, they're going to be less likely to do it unless they're being explicitly told to. But if you can have tests that run really fast and provide instant feedback and tell you what's going on, they become much more enjoyable to write. So this slice test is just going to load up the things that it needs to do a JSON test. It's not going to load up services and controllers. It's just loading up what we need. What we also get out of that, though, is we get a couple of beans that are really going to help us out. So the first one is, because we're using Jackson, we get a Jackson tester. And this is going to test a particular type. Now, we don't have a developer type yet, but we will have one in a minute. And then we also get a object mapper, which is from Jackson. And I won't use this today, but I just wanted to show that you get an instance of this. So you get these two beans in here that are really going to help us write our tests. So now what we're missing is we're missing a developer. So I'm going to come in here and create a package called model, and I'm going to create a developer class. And so this developer class is just going to be a pretty simple data class. It's going to have an integer ID, string first name, and a string last name. So we're going to create a constructor and getters and setters. And if anybody's been watching me over the last few months, you know that this could be a record, but I'm just kind of keeping it a little bit verbose for demo's sake. So now we have this developer class, and now I want to test this. So we have our JSON here in our resource folder. So I'm just trying to watch the comments here too. Yes, this would also work for records. So I think the thing we're testing here is just serializing and deserializing. So I don't think
I'll try to keep track of the questions, right. And I'm building up a little question list here. I will throw them up on screen if they're relevant to what you're doing. Otherwise, I'll keep track and we'll circle up, or I'll interrupt.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. So so the one thing now is I have in this, the reason I put this example developer JSON in the resource folder is because now I can use a resource for that and get it from the class path. So I'm going to say, hey, this is my resource. I have some developer JSON, and this is going to be private, and import this and make sure you pull this from Spring Framework Core. And we are going to say that this is coming from the class path. So class path and developer.json. So now we have that. So now we can use that JSON example as a way to kind of test against what we're doing. So I want to write a couple tests. So the first test I'm going to write is, hey, I want to test serialization. Does anybody else have a problem spelling that or saying that? I don't know why it just doesn't roll off the tongue for me. So serializing is the act of, I want to create a new developer object, and then I want to create the JSON from that object. I want to serialize the object into JSON. So what I'm going to do is say, hey, I got a developer instance here. Let's say new developer. And Vega. And then what I want to do is I want to use that Jackson tester that we got as part of marking this class as a JSON test. So we get this instance of a Jackson tester. And if we click into this and look at the structure, there's a whole bunch of methods in here that we can use to like read from an object, write from an object, parse, etc. So that is going to give us the ability to say, hey, I want you to go ahead and write out that developer object. We'll need to add an exception, and then we can introduce a local variable. So now we get some JSON. We've taken that developer object. We've used Jackson to write out what the JSON should look like. And then what we can do is we can do an assertion on that. So we're going to use assert that. Want to come in. Not sure why that's not coming in. Static org dot assert j. So we're using assert j here. Assertions. So now what we can do is we can say assert that, and whatever that JSON is that's coming back. The reason we're using this here too is because of what this returns, but we'll look at that in a second. So we have that JSON, and now what we want to say is that equal to the JSON from the resource that we've created. So we created this resource up here. One of the overloads for this method is to take in a resource, so we can just pass in our developer JSON. And now we're comparing what Jackson is written out as JSON to that actual JSON file that we have. So oftentimes, we may get JSON file from another team saying this is kind of what the contract looks like. So we can start to like line these up. So let's see if this works. And it does. Okay. Now let's just do a quick flip side of that, which is the deserialization. Then I want to take a look at what happens when the JSON doesn't line up perfectly, because it's not always a one-for-one match perfectly. And that's really what I want to dive into today. So I'm going to write one more test. We're going to say test deserialization. Okay, so we're going to have a developer, and this time we're going to get it from our file. So we're going to read in that file, and you see one of the overloaded methods there is the resource. So it's going to take in a resource for us. So we can say that, and then go ahead and just get the object. So now that I have the object, I can say assert that developer.get ID is equal to 1. I'll say that developer.get first name is equal to, and okay, so let's run this real quick. Yeah, I see the question. So the question is, it would be interesting to see how this example to test works for dates in different regions. Like dates are always fun, a pain in the butt. But I'll show you an annotation in a second that can help with that. I don't know if it really helps with that, but let's talk about that in a second. So these two work. Now, again, the developer has ID, first name, and last name, and our JSON that's coming in matches that up exactly, right? But what happens when it doesn't? So let's just say that we had something like this. Go ahead and run our tests again. They're going to fail. So it's going to try and say, hey, I was trying, Jackson tried to take the incoming JSON and match it to the object and create an object from that, and it couldn't. So there are a bunch of annotations in Jackson that we can go ahead and use for some situations like this. So one of those is the JSON property. So we can say, hey, when you're trying to kind of line these up, this is the property that you should be looking for, not first name as in one word. So let's go ahead and add this. And go ahead and run this. So now those go ahead and work. And again, the reason I wanted to show this is I think this is a stepstone to kind of a gateway to fixing this in a bigger picture. But, for the longest time, I would do this in like the web controller, right? I would just create a controller. I'd create a method that takes some request body, and my test would be, let me see if I can get it to work. And if it worked through like Postman, great. If not, I'd hack away at it and get it to work. I think this is a good first step in making sure that we have automated tests in place, because if something were to change, now the automated tests are going to catch that, right? Now you still need to integration test this, because what if you're working with the problem that came up that I was thinking of was in a large corporation where I used to do some work. You had multiple teams talking to each other, and there were contracts of like, this is what our API is going to look like. And this won't catch a change on somebody else's end, but it just says, hey, this is what I think is going to happen. And if this is what the response from that API is, then we're good. Our application is going to work. But that integration test will now make sure that you can test that, at least to make sure that on their end that contract didn't change. So I think this is a good first step instead of always just relying on some type of controller test. And what I love about this is again, this is a slice test, and this slice test is very fast. So you get real quick feedback. Even in a larger application, we're really just dealing with a few classes. So it doesn't take long for the application context to start up. And if you were to run this as like, say, a Spring Boot test in a large application, the whole context would start up. So I really like these slice tests. There's a bunch of them around. And, we could talk more about those another day, but this is just one I wanted to talk about. So I have something else I can quickly show related to this, but are there any comments that we should attend to right now, Deshaun?
I think you're good right now.
Okay, let me just show one more thing. And the reason I brought this up is there are often times when you're working with third-party APIs and you don't really have control over what that JSON is, and then trying to like line everything up is not as easy as that developer example. So here I'm building out a demo that talks to Notion. Notion is this tool that allows you to pretty much do anything. It's kind of like a Excel spreadsheet, supercharged with like Airtables, and just can kind of do everything. So I manage a lot of stuff in there, and they have an API. And I want to show you an example of what comes back. So here's a bunch of JSON that comes back for them. And again, when you don't really have control over what that JSON looks like, you need to model your objects off of this JSON, right? So how can I go ahead and create some objects that look like this, and then Jackson can kind of put everything together for us. So this is a list of basically appearances. So I wanted a place where I can keep like, when am I speaking next? When is my next live stream? And then I can display those on a website somewhere. So I use the API to pull that into an application and then display them somewhere. So this is the first one, which is a Notion database. So you can see it has an object. It has an array of results, which are each of the talks or rows in the database. It has an X cursor and it has more. So if you look at database here, we have that object is just a string. We are using JSON property to say, hey, even though I've called this pages here in the JSON, it's a result. It's results. And this is actually a list of pages. And then we have next cursor and has more. What's interesting though is in this one, this is a page. We have some fields here like object, ID, created, last, all of these right here are going to be the same in each of these. What gets interesting here is this properties is very dynamic. I'm not sure what this is going to look like every time. So how do you represent dynamic data in JSON? Well, the way that we do that is, I've created this object. You see like JSON property here, JSON property. This last one right here is a of type JSON node. So again, because that properties key is going to be very dynamic, I can't just map it. I don't know that there's a URL, a type, a location. This is very fluid. So using JSON node, you can say, this is one way to think of these nodes is to consider them similar DOMs nodes into an XML DOM tree. So it's just, again, a way to represent dynamic data. And then if you want to get to that information, you can. And the way that you do that is, let me think here. So yeah, so this page comes in and you can just say, hey, give me that properties. Properties is a JSON node. So you see JSON node, but then you can just get something by its key. So I want to get title, because again, this, if you look at this JSON, it's very structured kind of weird. So that first one was title. So you have to get title, and then title, which is an array of objects. So then title of text, and then of content. This is what I'm trying to pull out there. And so you can see you got to get title, get the first one in the array, get the text, get the content, and then give me that as text. So this is really kind of what I wanted to show today. Just being able to run these slice tests. I think this is a good first step before even creating the model. If you have an API that you're working with, take that JSON in and start to work from that forward, if you can. I mean, you can't always do that in this situation, but take that JSON, write your tests first, write your model based on those tests. And I think that's a good way to kind of progress through this. Because again, it's not always as easy as that developer one was, where there's 3 fields. I mean, it's never that easy unless you're doing a demo like this, right? So,
and you're using Notion. Can you throw the link up for Notion for the group?
Yeah, let me just.
It has an open API.
Let me see, Notion. I just want to close.
Yeah,
so
we've been doing demos. You've been doing a lot of demos lately around Notion, its API, and how to use it with Spring. So I expect that we'll be doing that at least for the near term.
Yep.
Pulling out some of these demos.
So Notion is just notion.so. There's a bunch of stuff in my Notion, but I'll just show you one. Like, I manage my newsletter in Notion. So I have this like Kanban board. Hey, this is the one I'm working on. This is the one I just published. So if you go into here, I can write this. Here's all the information for this particular newsletter. Oh, I mentioned office hours in there too.
Hey.
So this is Notion, but now I can use an API to get this information out of there. So Notion API, and here it is. And there's a way to get started. Now, if you're using the if you're using this in JavaScript, there's an actual SDK, and it's really easy. And so what I've been doing, and I know there are some out on GitHub, but what I've been doing is just for my own fun is kind of reverse engineering that JavaScript client, because I'm used to using that one, and reverse engineering it into Java so I can use it in a Spring Boot app. So we'll have some more to show on that soon, but that's what I've been having fun with. But I love Notion. If you've never used it, it's free. I'm not getting paid for this, so.
All right.
Oh, I did want to mention one more. So that, as I said, this is kind of a gateway into something else. One thing that I've seen in larger enterprises is that these APIs, you know, when you have like microservices everywhere and you have different teams managing these services, these APIs can frequently change. And like, how do you keep up with that? You know, one way is, which we just talked about, is making sure you have tests around what you can serialize and deserialize. And if those tests are failing, guess what? Something's broke somewhere. You're going to catch that. The next way to do that is something called Spring Cloud Contract. And this takes it to a whole nother level and really has like, it's defining a contract and saying, hey, this is what I expect. If I don't get this, things are going to break. So this is something after that step to kind of look into.
K7's question: the approach to get the properties out of the JSON node might not generate an array out of bounds exception ? If so, How do we solve this? I think we have some expectations around what the data that we're getting, what
We
at
do.
least we're looking for, and that's how we're going to determine which array we're digging into. How do we do it if we don't know what that looks like? We kind of have to do an example first, right?
So which one am I in? Okay. So the idea behind this is I have a Notion service that is returning pages. So these pages, you're right, this is completely dynamic. The properties will be the same for every implementation. What is very specific to the project that I'm working on right now is that I know in these rows, let's see if we can find it, talks. I know in these rows, this is what my data set is going to look like. Here are a title, a type, start date, end date, location, etc. So I know what I'm pulling out of there eventually. So while this is dynamic, I have a very specific map to, where is that? Talk service. This map page to talk is very specific to this application. So there shouldn't be a scenario, we could probably write some logic around here to make sure that we're not running into that scenario. But in this case, like I know that something is there.
Great question. Thanks. So with that, thanks for the demo.
Yeah,
let's circle back and talk about some of the questions that came up. Again, we want this to be open, interactive. Bring your questions. Because sometimes we can, dig in and show a demo. And yeah, we're figuring it out. So I will pull up some of the questions that I saw, and we'll go from there. Hey, it's office hours. We don't have all the answers, but we do have Slack. We know the guys. They're right over there in Slack, and yeah, they wrote this stuff. So hopefully we can get your questions answered. The first one there is, can you suggest a roadmap to learn Spring? My default, I'll start, is Tanzu Developer Center. We talked about it already. There's tons of resources. I don't think that everybody's path is the same. I think that you kind of start where you are and use something like Tanzu Developer Center to figure out what your next step should be. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is a loaded question, and I get it a lot, and it's been on my mind lately, and it's something I really want that I've been trying. I've been quick to not start creating content on it because it's such a loaded question that I really want to get it right. And it's the same as if somebody were to come to me and say, how do I learn Java? Well, there are very different paths for what you want to do with Java, right? And I think the same can be said about Spring. So I think first is really just kind of being honest with yourself and what, asking yourself what you want to learn it for. So if you want to use Spring to build web applications, and more specifically, you want to use it to build REST APIs and GraphQL APIs and microservices and learn cloud stuff, those are a bunch of different things that you could be learning to build. And so you really need to first understand the reason for wanting to learn it. So after you kind of determine that, it's just like if you were going to pick a path in Java, I would tell you, yes, learning the core fundamentals is kind of the first necessity. So finding some resources, the Spring Framework documentation is great. I love it. Start there. So there's the Spring Framework, and then there's Spring Boot. Start with the Spring Framework documentation as far as just like the kind of overview and the core stuff. That will kind of introduce you into, hey, what is an application context? What is a bean? All those kind of core fundamental terms that you're going to hear over and over again. Then, if you have something very specific that you're going to build, Like, hey, I want to build a REST API. Go to the Tanzu Developer Center. Go to Spring.io, has some guides on there. I really like these guides. They're like short, 15 minutes. Hey, how do I build a REST API? Or how do I build a scheduled task? There, follow along. Hey, here's some code. Here's everything you need to go ahead and do that specific task. Once you get the fundamentals down, then you can really just hone in on what you're trying to use Spring for. And if it's build REST APIs, go out on YouTube, find some videos out there. The Spring Developer Channel has a bunch of really good videos. That Dan Vega guy has some videos out there. Find some, if you enjoy reading, there's some really great books out there. From gosh, there's so many I can't even think of. I know right off the top of my head, Greg Turnquist, who's on the Spring Data team, has a couple books. Mark Heckler, who used to be on this team, who is at Microsoft now, has a really good book. And I'm missing a bunch of people, and I'm really sorry, but there are some really good books out there on Spring. So check those. Oh, Josh. Duh. Although even like some of the React, so like if you get into like reactive work, Josh has a book on reactive Spring, and so that's something that you can go down. Again, it's really kind of picking that path, and once you have the core basics down, going down that path and learning all the things that you need to do. Like I said, it's a loaded question. There is no easy answer to that.
So let's jump from that one to the next one. What are good projects to showcase for portfolio as a Java backend developer? I'm going to start by saying, start where you are, because I think these two questions are they're good for each other, right? Figure out something that you want to develop, something that interests you, that you'd have fun doing, and use that as your portfolio piece. And then that portfolio piece, something that's going to challenge you and force you to learn, let that decide what path you're going to go down to learn Spring.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, I think two things for me would be, one, you're on the right track. You're trying to build something. I think one problem people get into is tutorial hell. That is what we call it. It's where you just watch too many tutorials or read too many articles or read too much of a book without actually implementing. So you're on the right path. Pick something, as Deshaun said, to like build out. If it's if you like to go to the gym and you want to build out your own little app to like track some of your your different lifts or your different runs, that would be a cool thing to build. So find something that you're passionate about and build something around it. Two, and I'm just going to assume here that I think most people are building a portfolio to get a job. If that is the end goal, go out there and look at what the potential jobs that you want to get, what they're looking for. So let's just say that you are going to work for VMware, and all the positions that you saw on our career site had to do with Kubernetes and Docker, and hey, you really need to understand Spring Cloud. Those are things that you could focus on and build demos around. So because if you're going for specific job types, and then you have all these like demo code in your GitHub or in your portfolio around the things that those employers are looking for, that's only going to help out. So I love this. I love your Excel draw. I mean, I've seen this before, but it's great for everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. Up next, there was a question: when should we use implements serializable? Is it simple Pojo classes or actual entity JPA classes? When do I think about adding implements serializable?
I haven't thought about that for 6-7 years. I don't know. It's been a while. I don't think you actually need it on a JPA class. I could be wrong, but
I'll tell you when I think about it, when I run into serialize serialization exceptions. That's the only time where it pops in my head. Oh, yeah, duh. So, yeah. I don't know what the rule of thumb is. It depends on what your backend is. Are you using the same classes across different backends? Or are those, serializations changing, right? If you're changing across versions on how they're serialized, you've got a few things to think about. But that's a good, we should probably cover that one a little bit more in depth and show when, where, and why.
Yeah, I like that.
And we can just do this, right? Like, and then say, hey, yeah, let's cover that more in depth. That's a topic that could go pretty deep. Next question is it too soon to dive into Spring Native? And I'm going to say emphatically, no, it's not too soon. It's late if you haven't. Spring Native is a way to get our native compilation out of the code bases that we have. And for me, in my head, it's not the official answer, but in my head, that's a way for us to get more value out of the resources that we already have. If I can take that Spring Boot REST API, for example, that's running today in a JVM, and I can effectively move that to something that's natively compiled, has a smaller image footprint, maybe uses less memory. Yeah, it's a path. I don't think that it is too soon to dive into that. I have some demos already made where I'm actually doing Spring Native, not just on x86 or AMD 64. The process is the same. I do not think it's too soon to dive into. And I would love to hear what you're doing with it, right? I would love to hear your use case. So next time we do office hours, bring that back with you. What are the use cases that you're thinking about where Spring Native might be valuable to you? And we can talk about that deeper as well.
Yeah, and my answer is no, of course. I've heard a lot of people, not just here internally, but even externally, say just how big Spring Native is going to be and that it's the future. And so, yeah, it's is it for every single use case? No, but for the use cases that it is for, like it makes a huge difference. Serverless is a really big example of that. Like if you want to write a serverless function and you want to do that in Java or Spring, being able to compile down to native is everything. It is the cold restart, the hot restart. Like you want to be on native for that. So I also have that as one of my examples, hopefully coming soon, is to do kind of some of this Notion stuff could be serverless functions. Doesn't need to be a REST API. This is something that maybe you could call from a JavaScript web-based client over to our serverless function written in Java and Spring. And native is a great example of where you would want to use that.
I'll say this too. One of the other examples that I've done recently is around not just packaging or building those native executables, but then taking those executables and putting them into a container. So you have a native image that can run wherever. And the next step is I can have that ARM64 image and that AMD64 image in a image manifest. So I can have one artifact that can run on multiple, just like Java, traditional Java, where we develop that Java one place and we can run it on multiple JVMs. We can start to do the same things, get those same outcomes with Spring Native.
Cool.
Do you plan to use Kotlin in some of your examples?
For me, I could say this out loud. I've never used Kotlin before in my life. It's not that I don't like it, I just don't know it. And so for me, I have this long running list of things to learn, and it's on the list, but maybe I'm also a big Groovy fan. So I've been using Groovy for 10 years. So whenever I have a chance to, if I need like a script to hack together or something, I end up using Groovy for that. But nothing wrong with Kotlin, and I love all our friends over at IntelliJ or JetBrains. So, yeah.
Here's what I'll say. I'll say that there's absolutely possibilities. We're just kind of getting started with this office hours concept. Any feedback, insights, things that you would like to see, we want to hear about it. It doesn't have to be just 1 hour a week. I can see a path where we do more, and maybe we have an office hours that's just around Kotlin examples.
And we have a teammate who is really good at Kotlin, and Mario Gray. Yeah, a few actually.
Yeah.
But anytime I see Mario hacking away at Kotlin, I'm like, that guy knows his stuff. So we could always maybe bug him and say, how do we get started with this?
So, yeah, this has been awesome. I think we're on the right track. I would love your feedback, things that you'd like to see in a setup like this. We just want to make and provide another channel for the community to learn, to share feedback, and to help each other. And this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and we threw around the idea, I may come up with a mechanism for people to ask questions beforehand too. Maybe they can't make it and they just want to watch the replay and see their question answered. Or, that just may give us a little bit more lead time too we don't quite understand that question. Let's go ask some of our friends on the Spring team and see what they say.
One of the other things that we talked about is I would like to let this be like or at some point to come up with our tenets like, hey, that's a great question. We're not ready to answer that here, but let's put that question together. Or if it's a bug, let's build a nice issue for something. I did that earlier today on another stream. Like, let's talk about best practices for creating issues or creating a PR for something that you found. I'm going to always encourage this community to adopt the early releases, the milestone releases, because that it's valuable to us. It's valuable to the people that are actually doing the development. The more eyes we have on those things, the better. Maybe build that into part of what we do. How do we take milestone releases, learn from them, provide feedback on them, open issues, create PRs, etc., so we can strengthen this amazing Spring community.
Cool. There's I take that off. There's a nice comment.
Yeah.
It was a really nice presentation, especially when developing in a company. We don't have time to have deep discussions about things. And, a lot of this came from both Deshaun and I were developers in that same position. And we were always like, wow, I wish there was someone I can ask this question to. So that's kind of where this started from.
Thank you for the feedback. It is absolutely appreciated. Keep it coming.
Yep.
Tell your friends. We're kicking the tires on this, and I think that we're trying to see if this is something that we could do official for the greater Spring community at large. So thank you for the feedback. Thank you everybody for joining. Tanzu Tuesday, which has long been my favorite show on Twitch. I watch more Twitch than I do actual TV, and Tanzu Tuesday today is going to be extra special. Extra special. We're going to talk about Flux with one of the lead developers, and it's going to be amazing. So we're going to wrap here in a minute. We're going to give you time to go grab a drink, let the dog out, but come back at the top of the hour and join us for Tanzu Tuesday over on, I'm going to put that URL over on Tanzu TV. Yeah, that's it. I can just do that one. Tanzu.tv. And that'll get you there.
Sweet. And I'm hosting Tanzu TV next week with you.
Yes. It's going to be so fun.
It's going to be awesome. But first today, who's hosting today? Is it Lee?
Lee. Yes.
All right.
Anton, thank you for coming earlier today. Thank you again for showing up. And we got one more good show for you today here on Twitch. I want you to stay for VMware Tanzu and Tanzu Tuesday coming up here shortly. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Sachin, hello. You're late with your question. Go ahead and ask it. We'll take notes and we'll make sure to get to it next time. But make sure you're following Dan and myself. Check out the Spring Community on Twitter. Let me throw that link up there because that's a solid place. Let me grab that real quick. And yeah, we plan on doing this more often. So Sachin, please join us. Come back. Yeah. But go ahead and ask your question. Throw it up. If we can't answer it right away, we'll grab it for next time. Or not. Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining. And we look forward to see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks, everyone.